Man alone carried the native girl across the flooded creek. By morning, a rope bridge hung in its place. The rope bridge swayed gently in the morning breeze, its weathered planks casting shadows across the rushing creek below. Sarah Morning Eagle stood at its edge, her fingers tracing the expert knots that secured the structure to twin oak trees. No one in the settlement knew who had built it. No one except her. 24 hours earlier, the same creek had been an impassable torrent of muddy water and debris, cutting off the Lakota reservation from the trading post where Sarah worked as a translator. The spring floods had come early this year, washing away the old wooden bridge that connected the two communities. Sarah had been returning from town when the waters rose. The leather satchel containing her weekly wages pressed against her hip as she approached the creek bank, watching helplessly as chunks of timber and uprooted bushes swept past in the chocolate-brown current. The water level reached nearly to her waist, far too dangerous to cross alone. She had resigned herself to spending the night on the wrong side of the creek when she heard the steady clip-clop of hooves behind her. Turning, she saw a lone rider approaching through the cottonwoods, his silhouette dark against the fading sunset. As he drew closer, she recognized the weathered features of Thomas Mackenzie, the Scottish foreman who oversaw the railroad construction crew working 20 miles south. Thomas had been coming through these parts for 3 months now, always polite, always respectful when their paths crossed in town. Sarah knew the stories whispered about him in the settlement, how he had lost his wife and daughter in a cholera outbreak back in Kansas, how he worked from dawn to dusk, pushing himself harder than any man should, how he never spoke of his past beyond what was necessary for business. "Creek's running high tonight," Thomas said, dismounting near where Sarah stood. His voice carried the soft burr of the highlands, worn smooth by years in America. "Too high to cross," Sarah replied, pulling her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "I should have left town earlier." Thomas studied the rushing water, his experienced eye measuring the current and depth. At 38, he had crossed more rivers and streams than most men saw in a lifetime. His hands, scarred from years of railroad work, gripped the reins as his horse nickered softly beside him. "How deep does it usually run?" he asked. "Knee-high in summer. But with all this snowmelt from the mountains." Sarah gestured helplessly at the swollen creek. The light was fading fast now, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Soon it would be full dark, and the temperature would drop below freezing. Neither of them had planned to spend the night in the open. Thomas made his decision with the quiet determination that had carried him through loss and hardship. "I can get you across," he said simply. Sarah looked at him with surprise. "The current's too strong, even for a horse." "Not with the horse. With me." Before Sarah could protest, Thomas was already removing his heavy coat and boots, preparing for the crossing. He secured his weapons and personal effects in his saddlebags, then led his horse to a sheltered spot among the trees where it would be safe for the night. "I've crossed worse than this," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "River in Montana during a flash flood. Water up to my chest and moving twice as fast." Sarah watched him with growing concern. "You don't have to do this. I can find somewhere to shelter for the night." Thomas paused in his preparations, meeting her eyes directly. "My daughter was about your age when she passed. 20 years old, full of life and dreams. If she had been stranded somewhere, I would have hoped someone would help her get home safe." The simple honesty in his words silenced Sarah's protests. She understood loss, had felt it herself when her parents died of smallpox 2 years earlier. The pain in Thomas's eyes was familiar, the quiet determination to honor memory through action. Thomas waded into the creek first, testing his footing on the rocky bottom. The water was shockingly cold, fed by mountain streams and snowmelt. It reached his thighs immediately, the current tugging at his legs with surprising force. He worked his way across slowly, finding the safest path through the deeper pools and around the submerged rocks. When he reached the other side, he called back to Sarah. "Wrap your arms around my neck when I come for you. Hold tight and keep your feet up. The return crossing was treacherous. With Sarah's added weight, Thomas struggled to maintain his balance against the powerful current. Halfway across, his foot slipped on a moss-covered stone, and they both went under for a terrifying moment. Sarah tasted muddy water and felt the creek trying to sweep them downstream. Thomas fought back to his feet, his grip on Sarah never loosening. Water streamed from his hair as he pressed forward, step by careful step, until finally they collapsed together on the far bank, both gasping and shivering from the cold. "Thank you," Sarah managed between chattering teeth. "I don't know how to repay you." Thomas wrung water from his shirt, his breathing still heavy from the exertion. "No need for repayment. Just glad you're safe." They built a small fire to dry their clothes and warm themselves. As they sat beside the flames, Sarah found herself studying Thomas's face in the flickering light. There was kindness there, beneath the weathered exterior and the weight of old sorrows. "You mentioned your daughter," she said gently. "What was her name?" "Elizabeth." The name came out like a prayer, soft and reverent. She wanted to be a teacher. Had this idea about starting a school for immigrant children, helping them learn English while keeping their own languages alive. Sarah felt a connection form between them in that moment, fragile but real. "I do similar work as a translator, helping people communicate across cultures." Thomas nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. She would have liked that. Elizabeth believed people were more alike than different, underneath all the surface things. They talked quietly through the night, sharing stories of loss and hope, of dreams deferred but not abandoned. Sarah learned about Thomas's work on the railroad, how he took pride in building something that would last, connecting distant places and bringing people together. Thomas listened as Sarah spoke of her efforts to bridge the gap between her people and the growing number of settlers, trying to find understanding where others saw only conflict. As dawn approached, Thomas stood and walked to the creek edge. The water level had dropped significantly overnight, but it was still too high and fast for safe passage. He studied the banks, noting the sturdy oak trees on either side, their roots deep and branches strong. "I have an idea," he said, turning back to Sarah, "but I'll need rope, lots of it." Sarah tilted her head in question, but Thomas was already moving, gathering fallen branches and testing their strength. His mind was working like the engineer he had trained to be, seeing possibilities where others saw only obstacles. "There's rope at the trading post," Sarah offered. "Mr. Henderson keeps supplies for the trappers and travelers." Thomas shook his head. "I've got what we need back at the rail camp. Hemp rope, strong enough to hold a locomotive if it had to." He set off toward his horse, which had wandered back toward them during the night. "Stay here and keep the fire going. I'll be back before noon." True to his word, Thomas returned just as the sun reached its zenith, leading his horse and two others loaded with coils of thick rope, wooden planks, and iron tools. Sarah watched in amazement as he began to work, his movements precise and purposeful. Thomas selected two oak trees standing roughly 15 feet apart on either side of the creek. He secured one end of the main support rope to the first tree, wrapping it around the trunk multiple times and tying it off with knots Sarah had never seen before. Then came the dangerous part. Taking the other end of the rope, Thomas waded back into the creek. The current was still strong, but his determination was stronger. He fought his way across, the heavy rope creating drag that threatened to pull him downstream. When he reached the opposite bank, he was exhausted but triumphant. The next several hours were a masterclass in frontier engineering. Thomas stretched the support rope taut between the trees, adjusting the tension until it sang when plucked. He added secondary ropes for stability, creating a triangular support structure that could handle both weight and wind. Sarah helped where she could, holding rope ends while Thomas tied complex knots, fetching tools when he needed them. She marveled at his skill, the way his hands seemed to know exactly what to do even when working with unfamiliar materials. The wooden planks came next, each one carefully positioned and secured to create a walking surface. Thomas tested every joint, every connection, bouncing on the boards to ensure they would hold under pressure. When he was satisfied with the structure, he added rope railings on both sides, creating a secure passage across the rushing water. As the afternoon sun began to slant toward the horizon, Thomas made the first crossing on the completed bridge. Sarah held her breath as he walked across, his weight causing the structure to sway gently but hold firm. When he reached the other side and turned back with a smile, she felt a surge of admiration unlike anything she had experienced before. "Your turn," Thomas called, his voice carrying easily across the water. Sarah approached the bridge with nervous excitement. The rope railings felt solid under her hands, the wooden planks firm beneath her feet. The creek rushed below, but she felt safe, protected by Thomas's skill and care. When she reached the middle of the span, she paused to look down at the water that had seemed so impossible to cross just hours before. The bridge was more than a solution to a practical problem. It was a testament to human ingenuity and determination, a symbol of what could be accomplished when people worked together toward a common goal. Sarah understood that Thomas had built more than a crossing. He had built a connection. That evening, as they shared a meal beside the trading post, Sarah found the courage to speak the words that had been growing in her heart all day. "I've never met anyone like you," she said quietly. "The way you see problems as opportunities, the way you use your skills to help others." Thomas looked up from his plate, surprised by the directness of her words. "Just doing what needs doing. My daddy always said a man's worth is measured by what he builds, not what he tears down. You've built something important here, not just the bridge, but trust between our communities. People will remember this." In the days that followed, word of the bridge spread throughout the region. Travelers praised its sturdy construction and convenient location. The bridge became a gathering place where members of different communities could meet safely and conduct business. Thomas found himself welcomed in the settlement as a friend rather than just a passing stranger. Sarah began looking forward to his weekly visits to resupply and check on the bridge's condition. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, ranging from practical matters like engineering techniques to deeper topics like hopes for the future and the meaning of home. 3 weeks after the bridge was completed, Sarah was waiting at the trading post when Thomas arrived with news that would change everything. The railroad company was reassigning him to a new project in Colorado, a complex mountain crossing that would require his specialized skills. "When do you leave?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. 2 weeks, Thomas replied. "Long enough to train someone else to maintain the bridge and finish a few other projects." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She had grown accustomed to Thomas's presence, to the quiet strength he brought to their community. The thought of him disappearing back into the vastness of the frontier left her feeling suddenly alone. That night, as Sarah walked home across the bridge Thomas had built, she made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She would not let fear keep her from speaking her truth. The next morning, she found Thomas working on reinforcements to the bridge's support structure. He looked up as she approached, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said without preamble, "and I need you to listen before you respond." Thomas set down his tools, giving her his full attention. "I know you carry grief for your family. I understand that pain because I carry my own. But I also know that Elizabeth wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life building bridges between places while remaining isolated yourself." Sarah took a breath, gathering courage. "You've shown me what it means to solve problems instead of just enduring them. You've shown me that strength can be gentle, that skill can serve love instead of just ambition. I don't want you to leave without knowing that you've built a bridge in my heart, too." Thomas stood silently for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I stopped believing I deserved happiness after they died. Figured my job was just to work until I joined them. And now?" Sarah asked gently. Thomas looked at the bridge they stood on, then back at Sarah's face. Now I'm wondering if maybe I was wrong. If maybe there's still something worth building in this life. The morning sun cast their shadows across the wooden planks as Thomas reached for Sarah's hands. I can't promise it will be easy. Railroad work means moving around, uncertain schedules, hard living conditions. I can't promise it will be easy either, Sarah replied. Loving someone means risking loss again. But I think Elizabeth would approve of us taking that risk. Thomas smiled then, the first truly joyful expression Sarah had seen from him. She would have liked you. Would have admired your courage and your wisdom. That afternoon, Thomas sent a telegram to his supervisors, requesting a transfer to a more permanent position that would allow him to stay in the territory. The response came back within hours. The company needed someone to oversee bridge maintenance and construction across the entire region. It would mean travel, but shorter trips with regular returns to a home base. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on the bridge Thomas had built. Members of both communities attended, celebrating not just the union of two people, but the connection between their worlds. Sarah wore her grandmother's beaded dress, while Thomas dressed in his finest suit, brought specially from Denver for the occasion. As they exchanged vows with the sound of running water beneath their feet, Sarah thought about the night Thomas had carried her across the flooded creek. She had been stranded, cut off from home, when a stranger had risked his own safety to help her. Now that same man was promising to build a life with her, to create something lasting and beautiful together. The rope bridge became a symbol of their love story, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful connections arise from the most challenging circumstances. Years later, when travelers asked about the unusual wedding location, Sarah would smile and tell them about the night a bridge builder had carried a lost girl home, and how by morning they had both found something worth staying for. Thomas kept his promise to maintain the bridge, returning regularly to check the ropes and replace worn planks. But it was Sarah who truly tended it, greeting travelers with warmth and helping newcomers understand the customs of both communities. The bridge became more than a crossing. It became a gateway to understanding, built on the foundation of love and strengthened by the daily choice to connect rather than divide. Their first child, Elizabeth Morning Eagle Mackenzie, took her first steps on that bridge, holding tight to the rope railings her father had woven with such care. And as she grew, she learned the story of how love could flow as strongly as mountain water, carrying two hearts across any distance to find each other on the other side. The seasons changed around the bridge, each bringing new challenges and new stories. In winter, Thomas would clear snow from the planks and check that ice hadn't damaged the rope fibers. Spring brought fresh floods that tested the structure's resilience, but Thomas's engineering held firm. Summer saw a steady stream of travelers, traders, and families using the crossing to visit relatives or conduct business between communities. Sarah established herself as the unofficial keeper of the bridge's stories. She would sit with visitors in the evening, sharing tales of the crossing's history and the growing friendship between the settlement and reservation. Children from both communities would gather around her, listening wide-eyed to stories of brave river crossings and the mysterious bridge builder who appeared in the night. Thomas's reputation as an engineer spread throughout the territory. Railroad officials sought his expertise for increasingly complex projects, but he insisted on contracts that allowed him to return home regularly. He designed elevated trestles over mountain gorges, reinforced existing bridges against flood damage, and trained local crews in proper construction techniques. Each time he returned from a work assignment, Thomas would inspect every inch of the rope bridge, not because he doubted its construction, but because it had become a ritual of homecoming. Sarah would watch from the trading post porch as he tested each plank, tightened loose knots, and made small improvements to the design. These moments of quiet maintenance were as much about tending their relationship as preserving the physical structure. The bridge attracted attention from unexpected quarters. A photographer traveling through the region captured an image of Sarah and Thomas standing together at its center, the rushing creek visible below and cottonwood trees framing the scene. The photograph appeared in newspapers back east, accompanying an article about frontier ingenuity and cross-cultural cooperation. Government officials began arriving to study Thomas's design, hoping to replicate it at other remote crossings. Thomas welcomed their interest but insisted that each bridge must be adapted to its specific location and community needs. He shared his techniques freely, believing that knowledge grew stronger when it was widely distributed rather than hoarded. Sarah's role as translator expanded as more people sought to conduct business across the bridge. She found herself mediating not just language barriers but cultural misunderstandings, helping newcomers appreciate the customs and concerns of established residents. Her patient explanations and cultural sensitivity earned respect from traders, officials, and travelers alike. The bridge became a symbol of possibility for other communities facing similar divisions. Delegations arrived from distant settlements, seeking to learn how two different groups had successfully shared resources and space. Sarah and Thomas would walk these visitors across the bridge, explaining not just the technical aspects of construction, but the human elements that made cooperation possible. Young Elizabeth grew into a curious and adventurous child, equally comfortable in her mother's world and her father's. She learned Lakota songs from her grandmother and engineering principles from her father, switching effortlessly between languages and cultures. The bridge was her playground and classroom, a place where she absorbed lessons about problem solving, cultural respect, and the value of bringing people together. As years passed, the original rope began to show signs of wear despite Thomas's careful maintenance. Rather than simply replacing it, he decided to upgrade the entire structure using lessons learned from subsequent projects. The new design incorporated steel cables for the main supports, professionally milled lumber for the planking, and improved drainage to prevent ice buildup. The reconstruction became a community event. Members of both the settlement and reservation contributed labor, materials, and expertise. Sarah organized work crews and meal preparation, while Thomas directed the technical aspects of construction. Children too young to help with building served as messengers and water carriers, learning about cooperation through participation. The improved bridge was dedicated on the 5th anniversary of Sarah and Thomas's wedding. The ceremony brought together the largest gathering the region had ever seen, including railroad executives, territorial officials, tribal leaders, and families from dozens of miles around. Sarah spoke in both English and Lakota about the bridge's meaning as a symbol of what people could accomplish when they chose understanding over isolation. Thomas addressed the crowd with characteristic modesty, crediting the bridge's success to community support rather than individual skill. He announced that detailed construction plans would be made available to any community requesting them, along with training for local builders who wanted to learn proper techniques. The celebration continued into the evening with traditional foods from both cultures, fiddle music, and dancing on the reinforced bridge deck. Elizabeth, now walking confidently, charmed visitors by demonstrating how to tie the special knots her father had taught her, her small fingers working the rope with surprising skill. Word of the bridge's success reached Washington, where territorial administrators were grappling with conflicts between expanding settlements and established tribal communities. Sarah received an invitation to address a congressional committee about successful integration strategies, while Thomas was offered a position overseeing infrastructure development across multiple territories. Both declined the offers, choosing to remain in their community where they could continue the daily work of building understanding. Sarah explained to the disappointed officials that true cooperation couldn't be mandated from distant capitals, but had to grow naturally from shared experiences and mutual respect. The bridge spawned other collaborative projects between the communities. A shared school was established where children learned in both English and Lakota. preparing them for lives that would span both cultures. A cooperative store provided goods needed by both settlements, with profits supporting community improvements like better roads and water systems. Medical care improved through cooperation between Sarah's aunt, a traditional healer, and the settlement's doctor. They shared knowledge about treating common ailments and injuries, creating a more comprehensive healthcare system than either community could have maintained alone. The bridge became a lifeline during medical emergencies, allowing rapid transport of patients and supplies. Thomas's engineering skills found new applications in these collaborative projects. He designed a windmill to power grain milling for both communities, a water purification system that served the settlement and reservation equally, and improved irrigation channels that increased crop yields for everyone in the region. Elizabeth's education reflected this spirit of integration and innovation. She learned mathematics through bridge construction problems, history through the stories of both cultures, and science through observation of the natural world around their home. By age 7, she could calculate load distributions for simple structures and explain weather patterns in 2 languages. The bridge weathered its first major test during an unprecedented spring flood that swept away older structures throughout the territory. Thomas had designed with extreme conditions in mind, anchoring the supports deep into bedrock and using flexible joints that could adapt to stress without breaking. When the waters receded, the bridge stood intact while conventional crossings lay in ruins downstream. Recovery efforts after the flood showcased the bridge's strategic importance. Relief supplies flowed across it to isolated communities, while refugees found temporary shelter in facilities accessible only via the crossing. Sarah coordinated these humanitarian efforts, drawing on relationships built during years of patient bridge tending. The flood's aftermath brought new recognition to Thomas's engineering approach. Military engineers studying damaged infrastructure noted how his flexible design philosophy produced more resilient results than rigid structures that couldn't adapt to changing conditions. Requests for his consultation poured in from across the growing nation. Sarah found herself equally in demand as communities sought to replicate not just the physical bridge but the social cooperation it represented. She traveled occasionally to share insights about cross-cultural communication, always returning with new ideas for improving life in her own community. These experiences reinforced their conviction that lasting change happened through patient, daily effort rather than dramatic gestures. The bridge stood as proof that 2 people committed to understanding could create something beautiful and enduring, one careful step at a time. Elizabeth's 10th birthday party took place, naturally, on the bridge. Children from both communities played games that mixed traditions, ate foods that represented culinary fusion, and listened to stories told in multiple languages. The celebration embodied the vision Thomas and Sarah had pursued through years of careful bridge building, both literal and figurative. As sunset painted the creek and surrounding landscape in golden light, Sarah stood with Thomas at the bridge's center, watching their daughter play with friends whose diversity would have been unimaginable when they first met. The structure beneath their feet hummed quietly with the footsteps of people crossing freely between worlds, carrying goods, messages, and dreams across the gap that had once seemed unbridgeable. The bridge had become more than transportation infrastructure or community symbol. It stood as testament to the possibility of connection across any divide, proof that patient effort and genuine respect could create pathways where none had existed before. Every crossing reinforced the lesson that bringing people together required both strong foundations and flexible approaches, engineering skills and human wisdom. Thomas wrapped his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new travelers seeking passage and new stories to add to the bridge's growing legend. But tonight, standing together where their love story had begun with a desperate creek crossing, they could appreciate the solid ground they had built beneath their feet and the bright future stretching ahead across the flowing water.